All right, welcome back. So this topic, this section that we're going to talk about is one of my favorite things to teach. It's really, really fun for me. And I know I say that a few times in this course, but this is by far the actual favorite topic of mine. And it's really exciting to learn, in my opinion. We're going to talk about APIs. And the reason that it's exciting to learn is that it really opens up the possibilities for what you can build. You can make all sorts of amazing applications that use data from other applications or that rely on other applications to basically, you can stand on the shoulders of giants and make some really awesome things without having to do a ton of work and do everything yourself from scratch. So the subtitle is Connecting with Other Apps. And that's really the gist of all of this is what if we want to display a map, or I want to get latitude, longitude data, or I want to get weather data. You don't need to go put out weather sensors and connect them to the internet and then get that data. Someone else has done that and made it all nice and easy for you to understand and interact with, and then you just write code that uses that API. So without getting too far ahead of ourselves, API stands for Application Programming Interface, although it's actually Application Program Interface. Some people say programming. It doesn't matter, but the idea is that it's an interface for programs, for code or computers to talk to one another. So I can write code like this code. It's very small, but this code right here is interacting with Facebook. So Facebook has an API that allows me to get data from Facebook. So we have a human interface when I go on Facebook myself, and hopefully I don't spend too much time there. But when I do that, I'm looking at the human interface, the HTML usually that I see. It's rendered to me nicely. I got photos and colors and text and fonts and all that stuff. When I want to make an app, though, that uses Facebook data. So a popular example would be something like Tinder. If you're not familiar with Tinder, you're probably lying. But if you're actually not familiar with Tinder, it's a dating-ish application that you go on, you sign up with your Facebook account, and it shows you people's photos. You can kind of say yes or no, swipe left or right. But most importantly to what I'm talking about here is that it shows you if you have any likes in common with them. So if you have any favorite movies that you've added to both of your Facebook profiles, or books, or I think music as well, and a few other things. And it also will tell you how many friends you have in common based off of Facebook. So that data is not just coming from the regular Facebook website. Like if I went on Facebook, I could find that out. If I matched with someone, I could go on their Facebook page, if it's public at least, and I could manually compare, do we like the same movies? But of course, that's not happening. Behind the scenes in Tinder source code, there is code that's connecting to Facebook's API and saying, hey, these two people, well, it's probably more like, hey, this person that Colt has matched with, let's get their data and save it to our database, and then let's take Colt's data that we already have in our database and compare them. But the idea is Tinder is talking to Facebook. And that's one example, but APIs are literally everywhere nowadays in pretty much every application you use. So the term API is actually a broader term that refers to any type of code, any interface that is made for other code to communicate with. So if we go on Wikipedia, actually, the definition, the textbook definition, I guess, is in computer programming, an application programming interface, so they use programming, not program, is a set of routines, protocols, and tools for building software and applications. So that's very broad, and that is basically saying it's any set of tools, code, routines that you can use in an application. So it could be a database API, so that has nothing to do with the internet. It's just how you connect to a database locally on your computer. It could be a video card API or a hard disk drive API. So those are kind of other non-web-based examples. Or when I was learning Java in high school, I used an API to incorporate like graphical elements, buttons and windows and stuff into my applications. This really ugly Mario clone that I made in like Solitaire, I used an API for that. So that is a different kind of context. Typically what people mean when they refer to an API today is a web API, which has its own section here. But that is a subset of APIs in general. So APIs in general, any code, whether it's a library, a package, a module, a web API, some sort of interface to work with image analysis on your computer or a database, they're all over the place. So many different things that they do. You can use them in your own code. Web APIs are more specialized. They have to do with web interfaces to other code or to other applications. So, for instance, the Facebook API we talked about, the way that an application gets that data is through the web, through the internet. I am requesting that data from Facebook. So just like when I request a web page, let's say reddit.com/r/ah, which is cute photos or cute images of dogs and cats, usually with the occasional reptile lover/weirdo. No offense to anyone who has reptiles. I just can't get behind that. So when I request this, hit enter, I'm seeing the human version, the interface for me and for all of us. But there's also an interface for code to interact with. There's a web API where we request it, and rather than seeing this, our computer sees this. So I'll talk about what this is. It's something called JSON in just one video from now, but it's basically another format of data that is better and easier for computers to use. It doesn't have any of the fluff that we have here. Because if I'm writing an app, let's say I want to pit dogs versus cats, and I want to count the number of posts every day that mention dogs and the number of posts every day that mention cats, and have a chart. So you can visit my website and there's a live chart that's updating. What I would need to do is get that from Reddit. I would need to ask Reddit, give me the data today, or every hour I'd update it. Give me the current front page of r/ah. And then I would go through the data, this data here, and calculate, search for dog, search for cat, and tally it up and update my graph every hour. So that's a simple example. You can do much more complex things, of course. So here are some other examples of APIs. Twitter, you can do things like give me all the tweets that mention ice cream, or, on like CNN, there's always like live tweets coming in that mention certain hashtags or certain news events. Facebook, as we talked about, so many things you can get from Facebook's API. Profile pictures, likes, and you probably see it all the time in applications where you see that kind of warning or question that pops up from Facebook. It's like, this application wants to use your data. Do you accept it or not, or do you permit it or not? And you can kind of change things, who can see what and what data it can access. Weather API, so there's lots of weather APIs out there. They do different things. Reddit API, kind of what we just saw very briefly. Google Places, what gas stations are near someone. Google Maps, of course, to get a map going. The Yelp API, you can do things like, give me 10 restaurants in the zip code 94110. Lots and lots of things you can do. And then, of course, by combining them together, you can do even cooler things, which is actually this site, ifttt.com. If this, then that, is a way to connect APIs. So there are 309 services. And basically it's kind of confusing, I guess, but it's a way to have a visual interface to connect APIs to do things for you. So I picked up photography on the side, and there's so many photography sites if you want to do the whole social media thing. And there's Flickr and Instagram, Facebook, 500 Pixels, Dropbox, and and iCloud. And let's say I want all of those. Anytime I post a photo to Instagram, I want it to post to all of those other places. You can do that using if this, then that. So these are all the services they work with. So Facebook's API, Twitter's API, GitHub's. There's something called the Internet of Things. So APIs that will exist for physical objects, like a thermostat, where you can control the temperature through an API, or a video camera, security camera, where you can use code to turn it on and off or rotate it, or a light bulb that you can change the hue, the color of dynamically using code. So, in college, I had friends who would take light bulbs that were smart electronic ones, connected to the internet, plug them into their dorm, and then it would automatically take whatever music was playing. They wrote some code that would then kind of turn the lights on and off and change the color to make a little visualizer for the music. So there's tons of things on here. This is just a side thing that's cool for you to check out. If this, then that. If you're not familiar with it, you can look at browse recipes. So these are some of the popular things people will do, like remind yourself to put on sunscreen when the UV index is high. So it will automatically connect to an API that figures out what the UV index is, and then it will write some code that, whatever, I don't know what the UV index, how that works, what the scale is, but whenever it reaches a certain number, then it will send you an alert. Receive a notification to turn off Wi-Fi and save battery power when you leave a specific location. So you can do all sorts of things, connect, if this, then do that. All right, so that all relies on APIs, and they support 300 plus APIs, but there are way more APIs out there. And a great place to see that is a tool or a site called Programmable Web. And it's an API directory is how they build themselves. They have 15,000 APIs. There are more out there, but this is a great place to start. So if I know I want to use transportation data, let's say I want to make an app that will tell you when the next train is in San Francisco using your current location, or it will tell you what the latest train you can take to still make it to work before your first meeting is. Something like that. I would need an API to figure out when the trains are. So I could click on transportation here. I could do a search, and there's all these different APIs. There's a Yahoo Traffic. There's a bus, Lufthansa for an airlines. There's Indian Railways. So this is kind of all over the place. You could narrow it down, of course, or you could look for weather if I needed weather data. And there's all these APIs. You can click on one, like, let's go, that one is interesting, climbing weather. Provides weather data for climbing sites. And then I can see the URL for their homepage. Sometimes there's sample code, not always. In this case, there isn't. I can see the sites they support, the climbing sites. And then I can also see an endpoint that will show you, basically this is the site where you can go learn about how the API works. So we're going to see this in just a moment with one of the APIs we incorporate. But this will tell you the documentation, what the data looks like that you'll get back, where you're supposed to make a request to find certain data. So that's all I want to show, though. Mainly Programmable Web. It's a directory for lots of APIs. Some amazing things on here, some sort of obscure things. APIs to detect nudity in images. And then more common things like restaurants and bars and location guides, national park data, LinkedIn data, maps, Facebook, lots and lots of things on here. So great resource. Also fun just to browse some things that they have on here. If you ever, a lot of times I would give students a project and some people would know immediately they want to use a certain API, and then some people weren't inspired and they needed help. They wanted inspiration, and they just go browse until they find an API that excites them. Often on Programmable Web. Okay, so one last thing here that I just think is cool is that Tesla cars or motor cars, the electric car maker, has an API. I think it's unofficial, that they don't support it necessarily, but there's an API that you can use to interact with their cars. So you can view the documentation here of things you can do. You can query a car for how charged it is, what percent of the battery is charged, how much estimated range, and this is what you get back. So when you make a request to this URL, and you have to put in your vehicle ID, and I don't have a Tesla, so I won't do that, but if you did, you could put it in there and plug it in the red, and it would give you this information. But you can also do things like ask for the current climate settings, temperature inside, temperature outside. And then you can do really fun things like wake the car up or open the charging port on the side, start the charging, stop charging, flash the lights, honk the horn. So you can write code that will, and there's videos of people who do this. They'll have, when their alarm goes off in the morning, code will automatically check the weather outside and then appropriately set the Tesla, turn the Tesla on first, set its temperature inside to an appropriate temperature depending on how hot or cold it is outside, then it will honk the horn and start some music that will, wake up music or something. And there's videos of this online, and you can do that because of the API. So that's an example of the Internet of Things, where there's a physical object, a thing that is being controlled through an API. Okay, so we covered a lot there. To sum up, APIs, application programming interface, ways for you to write code that interacts with other code, other pieces of data, application services. Typically, web APIs is what most people refer to, which are APIs that are structured in a way that you interact with them through the web, usually through HTTP requests.